Good afternoon to everybody. I welcome you in the room and on the screen to this event with Vuk Jeremić. Vuk Jeremić is known to most of you, but I still feel that I should introduce him. Vuk Jeremić has been the foreign minister of Serbia in the government times of Tadić, a close friend of Tadić, and he was responsible later on that there is some hope in the United Nations. He was president, the first Serbian president, I suppose, in the United Nations General Assembly, and also candidate then for the Secretary General after Ban Ki-moon, and almost selected. I'm saying it also with a sort of sadness in my mouth, because I would have loved to have a Central European there in this position. He is also an intellectual. He founded, and he's now the president of an international institute also for development studies, involved in reform processes in the United Nations systems. And furthermore, you see, that's a long story when you talk about Vuk Jeremić. He has been a party politician throughout his young life. And he is the founder and now the head of the party, which is called People's Party, more or less. It's a center-right party with still quite small support by the population. We are always hopeful that it will get better. He is in the opposition. And we talked before we start this discussion here now, whether there might be snap elections in Serbia in September. I'm not going to tell you what he told me, but maybe you can ask him what he thinks about the situation of President Vučić. Well, that is it. We invited him, but not as a politician, really. We invited him as a well-known intellectual. He's a chief editor of a magazine, Horizons. He's been lecturing in Harvard, Cambridge, educated also in these places. I know that he is someone who can not only tell us what's going on in the Balkans today, but also how he sees the longer time frame of what's going on. And that's why I'm very happy that he decided to call his talk Geopolitics of the Balkans, the Revenge of History. There are some students in this room who may be reminded of my own course here at the Academy called Politics of Memory. And the Balkans are one of the best examples of how important politics of memory are. My last word before I ask him to give the lecture and open up the discussion also with the students here is that some of you may remember we had our last speaker from the Balkans, Albin Kurti, Prime Minister of Kosovo, and he was very outspoken how he saw the main problem with Serbia when he said it's some sort of imperialistic trauma or hegemonic trauma that still haunts Serbia. And I have a gut feeling that our speaker tonight might agree to what Albin Kurti says. He might not agree to other things that the Kosovo Prime Minister says, but this one, I guess, that there are things around on the Balkans which need a little bit more explanation that we normally explain in a Western European context. But I'm too far already into the topic. I give the floor to Vuk Jeremić. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Brix, for this most kind introduction. Good afternoon, everybody. It's a great honor. It's a great privilege to be here at one of the most prestigious international institutions teaching foreign affairs since a couple of centuries ago. One of the best schools in the world with maybe just a few short interruptions. So it is a distinct privilege. Thank you, Ambassador Brix, for your invitation. Excited to be here. I'm grateful for this big attendance. I'm also deeply honored and humbled by the presence of some of the very old friends that I have had in this career. Also, my mentor at Harvard, Jeffrey Sachs, is here. I'm immensely grateful to him, not just for his presence, but for many things that he had taught me over the course of these years. The topic of the conversation of this afternoon is the Balkans, and this is not entirely unknown geography for Austria. I don't know if it's true or anecdotal, but Chancellor Metternich once said that it actually starts at Renweg. I don't know exactly the geography of Vienna, so I don't know if we're sitting here on the... I don't know if we're like on the European or on the Balkan side of Renweg, but nevertheless, I'm not going to assume that everybody is deeply familiar with the Balkans. So allow me to give a brief introduction of this very complex place. And when things are complex in nature, and you try to analyze and understand them, you're always well advised to go to the fundamental forces and to laws of physics and chemistry, electromagnetism, gravity, and so on and so forth. Well, when one tries to understand complex issues in geopolitics, one, I think, is always well advised to go to the fundamental forces there too, which are geography, history, and the main corollaries, which is culture and religion. So I think that understanding Balkans, or trying to understand Balkans, begins with a little bit of a turn to history, trying to understand the systemic, century and millennia-long powers and forces that ended up drawing the current picture that we have. So Balkans always looks like it's in the verge of a war. It rarely happens, but when it happens, it tends to be catastrophic. And the current layout is, in my opinion, the result of millennia of conflict between essentially Europe and the Middle East. It predated the emergence of Christianity and Islam, but it continued well after their inception all the way until today. That piece of geography of Europe was always critical for everybody who, for any reason, had the ambition or interest in projecting things from the north to the south or from the south to the north of the continent, be it goods, people, force. It served as a base for Alexander's quests to Asia. It served as a highway for the Romans to go down to Egypt to get the grains and treasures of Egypt. It served as a way for the Crusaders to go to Constantinople, to the Ottomans to try and conquest Vienna. It was crucial for Germany in the Second World War, trying to go down and help its Italian ally. It was a crucial buffer between the Warsaw Pact and the Western Alliance. So for many, many centuries, somebody was always having a strategic interest in pushing things through, either northwards or southwards, and somebody else was opposed to it and tried to prevent these things being pushed through. So the frictions and the conflict between the great powers occurred in this geography. After the 15th century, the rivalry and the friction between the Eastern Christianity, Western Christianity, and Islam dominated those drives. I'm not saying that the theology drove the great powers, but religion did end up defining most of the smaller nations of the Balkans, which is a part of today's picture. So in the north, which is the plain, you have Croatia with the predominant Catholic majority. You have northern Bosnia with a predominant Muslim majority. You have parts of Serbia with a predominant Orthodox majority. And then in the south, you have the mountains, which is southern Bosnia with the mix of Muslim and Orthodox. You have Macedonia with a mix of Muslim and Orthodox. You have Montenegro with a mix of Muslim and Orthodox. You have Albania with a mix of Catholics, Muslim, and Orthodox. And if this sounds complicated, it is because it is. It is very complicated, and it has been for centuries part of the explanation as to how we got here. But I will, in the interest of time, try to fast forward to a little bit more recent history, which is the history of the breakup of Yugoslavia in the 1990s that coincided with significant convulsions in global affairs that some people tended to call or to view as famously the end of history, the period after the end of the Cold War, when there was an illusion that history was going to come to an end. And this is not the first time that humanity is falling under such illusions. Usually after catastrophic wars, there are new layouts of a world order. So after the Napoleonic Wars, you had the Congress of Vienna. After the First World War, you had Versailles. After the Second World War, you had the Conference of San Francisco. And each and every time, the contemporaries thought that they were building up the world order that was going to last forever. But it was never the case, and similar was the situation with what happened after the end of the Cold War and what was at that time understood to be a unipolar moment of American dominance, the beginning of the American century, and the decisive victory of liberal democracy and liberal capitalism. Well, that illusion came to a crushing end. In my opinion, there are disagreements on what was exactly the date of the end of history. Some people believe it was 9/11. Some people believe it was the beginning of the latest outbreak in the Ukraine war, which was last year. I am of the opinion that it happened in the year 2008, when two things happened almost concurrently. It happened within the span of a few months. One was the beginning of the international global financial crisis that for the first time raised eyebrows and generated questions about whether the globalization was really such a great thing for everybody, because a crash in the mortgage market in the United States can cause you to lose your job somewhere in Europe or in Latin America. So that was one thing. And the other thing was the decisive return to history of Russia, which was thought to be forever removed from history with the collapse of the Soviet Union. Well, in 2008, Russia did something that was counterintuitive to the crowds in Davos. And this is what happened in Georgia. Well, very well knowing that this act was going to cause serious economic consequences and economic damage, that ran counter to the understanding that from now on, it's just the economy stupid. It was never going to be just the economy stupid. But in the year 2008, that came to a very plastic symbolism with the Russian invasion of Georgia. Not entirely unrelated to the developments in the Balkans of the same year, 2008, and I refer to the unilateral declaration of independence of Serbia's Kosovo and Metohija province, which happened in February 2008. I'm sure that there are going to be questions about Kosovo, so I will reserve the time to answer them in detail. I trust that my position on Kosovo is probably not a secret to most of you. I do believe that probably the last big mistake of George W. Bush administration was the pushing over the precipice of the declaration of independence of Kosovo with catastrophic negative consequences for the long-term peace and stability in the Balkans, but not just in the Balkans, in the Caucasus and elsewhere and beyond. But as I said, I'm going to discuss Kosovo with you if there are questions from the audience. What also happened in this recent history, if you will, were some fundamental changes in the disposition and the outlook of the European Union. In the year 2003, it's 20 years from now, we're going to be celebrating the 20th anniversary of this event this year. There was a European Union summit held in Thessaloniki. And in the year 2003, in Thessaloniki, agreement was made, consensus was reached, the formal conclusion was announced that all the Balkan countries were invited to join the European Union. The process was laid out, the parameters were defined, but in principle, the political decision was made. The door was open to everybody. Now, on the 20th anniversary of this historical declaration, I'm sad to say that this dream has not been fulfilled, in large part down to the geopolitical developments and mistakes committed by major actors in the Balkans. In the meantime, Kosovo's declaration of independence being just one of them, perhaps the most decisive one, but not the only one made in the meantime. Right now, there is very little appetite for enlargement in Europe. There are countries who are champions of enlargement, and Austria is one of them, but not everybody thinks this way. And as you know, there is a consensus necessary in the European Union. What shook the European Union in the meantime, we can spend hours debating. I'm going to refer to some of the most important and significant shocks. One being the already mentioned financial crisis that in Europe degenerated into the Greek crisis and everything that followed the Greek crisis. Then there was the 9/11 moment of Europe. This is the phrase that I am borrowing for Ivan Krastev. The 9/11 moment of Europe, for Europe, was the 2015 refugee crisis that fundamentally shook the politics of many of the member states and the functioning of the Union itself. And there was a Brexit, which also brought shocks, and now there are the modern, the contemporary challenges that also include the security challenges with regard to the Russian Federation. But the way the European Union functions right now is that it requires consensus for making more important decisions. I'll be very frank with you. Nobody can convince me that the European Union is going to give Serbia or Bosnia or Albania a veto power in the European Council. Not a chance in the world. And it is difficult to blame such logic. It is very, very difficult to steer the European Union with the current 7 members. Imagine expanding this number to the 30-something and giving everybody veto. That is not very likely to fly before Europe reforms itself, before the decision-making in the European Union becomes different. I don't know how long is this going to take, but it's not going to happen overnight. And unfortunately, the enlargement in the Western Balkans has just become a story in which very, very few people believe in, given the circumstances. That creates an entirely different backdrop to resolve outstanding issues in the region if you compare it to 20 years ago when you had a Thessaloniki summit and when I remember at that time as a young student, I had a privilege of working with Serbia's leader at the time, Zoran Đinđić. I was in his office. I was a young aide of Zoran Đinđić, who really believed in the European future of not just Serbia, but of the entire Balkans. And I remember back in 2003, these promises were real. These hopes were real. When the door were open to the Balkans, I thought that it was for real. Now it's no longer for real. But the problem is that this narrative remained. So nobody's willing to admit, hey guys, this is not working. We gotta come up with something else. We gotta come up with something that is more functional. And then if one day the door become open again, then we're going to pass through this door. But let us not continue pretending in a false way to our domestic publics that things are just fine, because they're not. This is an important element of a context of the politics of the Balkans. Now, not talking about the geopolitics, talking about the politics of the Balkans. Actually bringing back truth and honesty in our respective domestic narratives. Because the lack of truthfulness, the lack of honesty in these debates is one of the reasons why there is a growing dissatisfaction and basically the feeling of disgust towards politics in our countries of the Western Balkans. Young people are turning away from politics because they see it as a not so honorable job anymore. And they're leaving in big numbers, they're leaving massively, thereby compounding the problems with the demographic decline, which is, again, one of those strategic factors that one has to take into consideration when talking about the present and the future of the Balkans. So I'm going to end up with the initial remarks of mine. I'm going to end up with a brief address of Serbia's situation. Ambassador Brix was indeed correct when he had said that I was invited here not as a political leader in Serbia, but as a former diplomat and somebody trying still and aspiring to be an intellectual. But the truth of the fact is that everything that I say is very much listened to and carefully analyzed everywhere. So I apologize for not being capable of completely depoliticizing my remarks here. I believe that Serbia itself is in a very, very bad shape. It's in a very bad shape institutionally. It's in a very bad shape when it comes to democratic governance. It's in a very bad shape when it comes to certain human rights. It is in a very bad shape when it comes to the long-term economic outlook, given the way economic governance works and how much it's burdened by corruption nowadays under the current administration. That is a significant problem if you look at the Western Balkans as a whole, because Serbia is the biggest country. Serbia does influence everybody else one way or another. And this type of governance and this type of corruption, which is dramatic, and everybody knows this. Everybody knows this, in the international community as well. Everybody knows this in Serbia. It's a huge burden on finding efficient ways out of the current deadlocks, or the modern word for this is polycrisis. Finding the way out of the Balkan polycrisis is significantly impeded by the fact that the governance of Serbia right now is all but suboptimal. So I did try to be diplomatic. I would probably use different words if I were to describe the situation in Serbia back home, but one cannot escape from this fact that Serbia ways, the way it's run, represent part of the problem, but I'd say also that part of the problem, equally significant, is that the international community, the Western part of the international community, I would say, feels completely okay with this. They don't make an issue out of it, whilst they should. And at the time when the official narrative is still preaching the good governance, democracy, rule of law, fulfilling the criteria that are necessary to join the European Union, everybody's aware that Serbia, the way it is currently run, is never going to qualify, is never going to reach this threshold, because you wouldn't admit and you wouldn't accept such countries in the way that it is currently being run. So when you say, you got to do this and that, I don't know, there is a deal for Kosovo that they're trying to make Belgrade sign up to right now. Well, if you don't do that, there is going to be a stopping of the European process. Hello, the European process is completely stopped already. You can't stop a stationary object. So this is why this situation, not just on Serbia's side and on the region side, but also on the Europe side, this is a part of this very, very problematic context. And the very last issue that I want to say something about, because I said I'll finish by addressing the situation in Serbia, I'll talk about Kosovo, which is a part of Serbia, as the way we perceive it. I know that Prime Minister of the Provisional Institutions of Self-Government from Kosovo, from Pristina, was here a few weeks ago. He addressed past, present, and the future, tried to be aspirational in what he had said. But what he had not said, Mr. Kurti, is that Serbian ethnic group in Kosovo is right now the most endangered ethnic group in Europe, living under exceptionally difficult circumstances, being constantly attacked, abused, put in a difficult situation. And I am just referring to the official numbers of EULEX, the number of incidents and hate crimes quadrupled in the last 12 months, if you compare it to the period before. I'm not going to talk about the position of the Serbian Orthodox Church, which is very, very precarious, especially with regards to some of the holiest shrines of the Serbian Orthodox Church, starting with Visoki Dečani and the Patriarchate of Peć, which is, by the way, the official seat of the Serbian Orthodox Church. Constant pressures, constant abuse, and the failure to fulfill the decisions by the so-called Supreme Court of Kosovo, which was to do with the return of the land to the Serbian Orthodox Church. This has not been fulfilled, and the pressures are daily under such circumstances. It is very, very difficult. Even if the situation in Belgrade were to be better, and far better when it comes to domestic governance, even if Serbia were in a position to have a much more visionary and embracing government, I'd find it difficult to make a deal and to agree on how to go forward together with the current authorities in Pristina, led by the well-spoken but a very, very harsh acting Mr. Kurti. So, because I'm sure that somebody's going to ask me about the latest proposal of the European Union. Some people call it the German-French proposal. Some people call it the European proposal. I'm not going to go deep into it, but I'm just going to lay it out, my position on this, and then I'll be happy to answer questions with regard to the plan. I think it is completely unacceptable for Serbia. Completely unacceptable because it actually leads to accession of Pristina to the United Nations. And that is the opening of another season of tragedy in the Balkans. The creation of Greater Albania would be the next step upon this seat materializing, and the creation of the Greater Albania would not be a factor leading to more stability. It would be a factor leading to less stability in the Balkans. So I don't think that it is acceptable for Serbia. I am not speaking on behalf of Serbia. Ambassador Brix underlined that I'm not leading the biggest party in Serbia for the time being, but I do lead the biggest opposition party in the parliament, which is something. But so I'm not the person who's going to be chief responsible for this, but I think it's unacceptable for Serbia. And B, I don't think that this government of Serbia has any intention, despite of everything that they say, of signing it, because it would be lunacy and suicide for anybody from Serbia to accept, basically to recognize Kosovo as an independent state and thereby convalidate all the wrongs that have occurred in the province to the Serbian people and to the others in the last quarter of a century. So if there are any more questions on this, I'd be happy to get deeper into this analysis. So here is where I would like to end the initial remarks, if you allow me, Ambassador Brix, and now I'd be happy to answer any question from the audience.
Thank you very much. I guess there are many questions. One of the problems when you invite someone from the Balkans, it's always analysis plus politics. You were a perfect example of that you started with a long time analysis, going back to the Roman times, but you finished with your political remarks on the situation in Kosovo and your feeling, and maybe if I may ask this as a real question, your feeling that it is an illusion what's going on about the enlargement process at the moment, that there is no real chance for Serbia or any other Western Balkan countries to join the European Union, because you said they would never allow Western Balkan countries to have the veto right in the Council. Are you sure?
Well, would you let Vučić have a veto in the European Union?
Yeah, we have Orban. You have already these sort of people in the Union.
That's precisely. I did not want to mention other names, but thank you for raising these names. I mean, look at what kind of problems we have with Orban. Serbs can be only worse. Every 10 years, they tend to elect a person like this. We thought that Milosevic was last, and that he can never be anything worse than Milosevic. Well, you can get worse than Milosevic, and who knows if you can get worse still. So I personally don't think that if Switzerland wanted to join the European Union right now, I am not sure that Switzerland would find it such a straightforward path. You know why? Because Switzerland has this constitution that allows for things to be resolved by means of referenda. So imagine a referenda on a financial regulation of the European Union and the Swiss voters saying no. Like the Brits said no, asked at a referendum. Well, thank you very much, Swiss Confederation. We look forward to working with you and within the framework of the European economic area like we have worked in the past. Well, thank God, because the Swiss would never apply for a membership in the European Union. But if they did, they would find it very difficult, just like the Norwegians. So if it's difficult for Switzerland and Norway, I think it would be, because of the issues I explained, then it'll be slightly more difficult still for a place like Bosnia or Albania or Serbia, and Kosovo is not even a state.
Well, I had hoped that we had a more optimistic discussion on this, because with the European Union, the enlargement of the Baltic countries took long, but it actually was not a problem, and they looked to be quite successful. We also thought that countries like Slovakia might be an economic problem, and all that didn't turn out to be a problem. So I guess Mr. Vučić would have said something totally different from what you said now about the chances.
Yeah, he would say totally different and not meaning a word of what he would have said. And that's the difference. You know what? I don't think it's actually the end of the world. I think that we gotta face the truth and see what is best for us. I fervently believe in Serbia's place in Europe. I believe that Serbia deserves to have a European future. I believe that Serbia one day, and in not so distant future, is actually going to find its rightful place in Europe. And if membership is not on the table, it's not the end of the world. We can find ways of working very closely together, even if this membership, for the reason that I had explained, is not on the table. And Mr. Macron had launched the idea of the European political community last year. I think it's worth working on this. It's worth refining certain aspects of it. And I think that the future of the Western Balkans, if we are really after making it look like Europe, can be achieved in Europe. My hope is that I'm going to live long enough to see Serbia functioning like a modern European state. And there are modern European states that are members of the European Union, and I will take, I don't know, Slovenia or the Czech Republic as an example. And there are modern European states that are not members of the European Union. I'll take Norway and the United Kingdom as an example. I would like Serbia to be transformed so that it functions like a modern European state. I'd like to see Serbia integrated in the European economic space. I'd like Serbia being ruled like Austria is ruled. I would like to see Serbia having laws and courts like you do. And then it'll make very, very little difference if we are going to have a seat at the European Council or not. And I wish we do. But even if we don't, it's not the end of the world.
Well, I have to ask you one more question before I open up. That's your position on the Russian war and on NATO. I know for Serbia it's always difficult to talk about NATO and the sanctions. You said in public you are totally against these sanctions, and you don't accept the pressure put by the European Union on Serbia. Could you elaborate a little bit? Does that mean that you are looking forward to the Russian Empire?
Well, provocative way of asking questions is something completely allowed in diplomacy. So thank you for this. Thank you for this question and giving me the opportunity to clarify my position on this. Again, I am not in charge of making decisions in Serbia. I observed publicly that nothing wrong happened to Serbia for about a year. Serbia has not joined the sanctions against the Russian Federation. It was the decision of Alexander Vučić, and there was like a lot of loud talk that this was somehow going to lead to some kind of penalties for Serbia. I failed to see this materialize. Why? We can debate that. There will be certainly drastic negative consequences for Serbia if we were to join the sanctions regime. And some of them are political, the other are economic. The economic one are debatable. We can discuss how a situation brought about by our joining the sanctions on Russia could be ameliorated. But the political consequences would be very significant. I mean, I'm still waiting for a Kosovo question, but our position on Kosovo is not unrelated to the United Nations seat for Pristina. And the United Nations seat is achieved according to the Charter of the United Nations by means of first reaching an agreement in the Security Council with regard to the application of a potential new member, and then a two-thirds vote in the General Assembly. Well, the current situation is that there are two permanent members of the Security Council that are opposed to Kosovo's membership in the United Nations, which coincides with the position of Serbia, and one of them is the Russian Federation. So engaging in a sanctions regime against the Russian Federation would directly constitute a shooting in the foot when it comes to a very, very important national issue of national importance, which is sovereignty and territorial integrity. In other words, potential joining of Kosovo to the United Nations. So that combined with a very, very specific experience of the Serbian people with regard to sanctions. By the way, we suffered in the 90s one of the most harsh regime of sanctions ever imposed by the United Nations, which, by the way, makes it internationally legal, by international law, a legal sanction. I don't know if anybody is an expert on international law here, but all sanctions, all unilateral sanctions are illegal by international law. Only legal sanctions are the ones introduced by the United Nations through the Security Council of the United Nations. By the way, Serbia was subject to such sanctions. And our experience was that those who suffered the most were the ordinary people. They were meant to punish the leadership. What happened in reality was that the powerful became more powerful, the rich became richer, and the ordinary people suffered. Now, this is the moral argument why I think Serbia should in principle be against sanctions. Should be against sanctions to anybody in the world. But the moral arguments rarely come first when it comes to decision making in international affairs. The more pressing ones are considerations of the sort that I had started with, which is the Security Council seat. So if Serbia were to be on the verge of joining the European Union, maybe this conversation could have been different. But since Serbia is actually deeply buried and not moving an inch in the context of the European accession, it'll be very, very difficult to explain the benefits of joining the sanctions regime against Russia prevailing over the benefits of maintaining the status quo.
Vuk, you skillfully avoided answering my question. I like that. I asked about Russia and the Russian influence. There's so many Russian flags on the streets.
Oh, it is real. It is there. It is going to stay. Russian influence has been present in the Balkans for the good 400 to 500 years, similar to that of Turkey, and similar to that of Europe, or the Western family, be it Europe, be it the Euro-Atlantic family. As I said at the beginning, it has always been the triangle of influence and friction between the three main geopolitical actors of the past 500 years: the West, the East, Christianity, and Islam. And this influence, I think it is going to stay. I think it is an illusion to think that one of the three can be squeezed out by the combination of other two. I think Turkey is going to stay as a very important actor in the region for many decades and centuries. Russia as well as Europe. So I think that these are going to continue coexisting in Serbia. The renaissance, the upsurge in the sentiment, positive sentiment to Russia, was triggered by the 2008 unilateral declaration of independence of Kosovo. Not so much by the bombing. Not so much by the bombing as much as the 2008 unilateral declaration of independence, when Russia basically blocked it at the Security Council. And by the way, this was the very first time that Russia blocked anything of great significance in the Security Council in the aftermath of the Cold War. I remember I was a Minister of Foreign Affairs at that time. The Western powers, including the United States, were completely ignorant with regard to the possibility of Russia blocking it. The American diplomats and other diplomats, including European diplomats, told us, not a chance in the world, Russia is not going to use their veto. They're just trying to extract a high price from the West. Well, it proved not to be the case. And all the way until now, Russia is perceived as a protector of an important aspect of a national interest in Serbia, which is Kosovo remaining, at least legally, remaining a part of Serbia. And it, you know what, like, it doesn't cost them too much. It takes a simple "niet" at the Security Council, and it works very well for them. And the other aspect of this Russian positive influence right now is that it is kind of difficult for the Serbian public to digest the narrative. This is the first time after the Second World War that a powerful country is attacking its neighbor. This is the first time that somebody is having an attack. There is an attack on a sovereign country in Europe. I mean, there was an attack on a sovereign country in Europe, and that country, unfortunately, was Serbia. Back in 1999, it wasn't run by a government that I ever supported. I actually, as a student, was one of the founders of the movement that actually helped overthrow the dictatorship of Slobodan Milošević. But yeah, this country, my country, was attacked. It's not the first time that it is happening. And in so many ways, Kosovo is being used as a precedent for things that are currently happening First in Georgia, they happened, and now in Ukraine. If I am not mistaken, the preamble of the Crimean Unilateral Declaration of Independence actually contained Kosovo in the preamble, and was referring to the International Court of Justice's opinion of 2010. It was first the act of declaration, there was the act of independence, and then it was the act of accession to the Russian Federation. And it worked also in the case of the Donbas so-called republics, which are right now the place where the fiercest battles are being fought. So I hope this time around I had not avoided answering.
No, thank you very much. No, I'm happy that Serbia did not accept the annexation of Crimea and Donbas, at least. I open up here actually for discussion. I invite also our students from current issues to ask questions and make comments. Who wants to go first?
Thank you kindly. Thank you very much for your presentation. My name is Vuk Jeremić, alumnus of the DA. And one thing that maybe you can help to clear up for me a little bit is the conflicting narratives and historical and political narratives between heritage, conquest, and demography, in which Serbia is very much involved in this whole, well, they build much of their national myth, as I perceive it, through these blocks.
You said heritage?
Heritage, conquest, and demography.
Demography.
Yeah, I mean, religion is also a part of it.
A very important part of it. Yeah,
I would include that into
Sure.
demography. So most of it comes from the myth of the Kosovo Polje, of the Battle of Kosovo Polje. So as far as I understand, this is the sparking moment of the Serbian pride, of the Serbian nation, of the Serbian oneness. Yeah, for it was lost. The Battle of Kosovo Polje was, I mean, some say it was a stalemate, but in the end, with the Magyar incursions, it turned out that they did turn into a vassal of the Ottomans.
Sure.
Yeah, and so in this process of the vassalship, they also turned over settlement rights to the Ottomans. Wasn't that so? And in this process of settlement rights, many tribes from the Ottoman regions were pushed forward to settle the frontier, which was Albania and Kosovo. Why we see nowadays still the demographic change of Christian and Muslim,
Sure.
very, very intensely there. So first of all, this after the fact turn back of we did never give this away, it almost seems to me like a little bit of a revisionism of we never conceded this, we never gave this up of our control. I mean, there was then afterwards there were many struggles, we know that. But for me, this kind of sets up the undertone of war does not lead to cultural concessions. It does not mean that we have lost physically, that we have lost ideologically, narratively, mentally. I think this is also, I would like your opinion on this, I think this is also carried very much by the Orthodox Church, which is a very, very present, a very near presence to the population. This lack of concessions can also be seen in Bosnia, where there are many parts which would maybe be annexed or be okay with it. This is up to debate. But
I'm not sure if I understood this part of annexing in Bosnia. What?
It is only peripheral part of this discussion insofar as that I think that many Serbs would not see this as a detrimental turn of events if the northern Bosnian territories of the Republika Srpska would be turned to Serbia, to mainland Serbia. I think this is a very political topic which is not decided, but as far as I know, as far as I can see, there is not much repulsion to this idea. So, to me, and now this is more or less where I want your opinion on, it seems that the main reason of pushing this Serbian lost empire, as we started with, would be to maintain a national morale, of power, which in the end, as you just said, profits the political elite It does not profit the little man or woman. And this profiting of elites is, in the end, I think, one of the integral parts of the problematics with the EU accession, as it just shows of a lack of good governance. And also acting as a Russian anchor of interest, which you have very clearly put in, explained to us. So, to round it up, there is a saying that Serbia is an integral part of the Balkan security system, because for as long as Serbia wants peace, there will be peace. Thank you very much.
Should we collect questions, or would you like to answer?
Here we like a lot of questions here, so maybe I address them and then, okay. So thank you very much for this, for these questions and observations, and I'll try to address the gist, which is to do with the Kosovo myth, as you called it, and there are different ways of phrasing it: the Kosovo oath or the Kosovo pledge. But for all sorts of purposes, the mythical aspect of Kosovo for Serbian national identity, I think it is actually one of the vital elements of the Serbian national identity. This Kosovo myth combined with the Kosovo oath. And the Kosovo oath is that we are going to recover it one day, which happened after a very, very long strain of history. So I find it personally fascinating that the myth of the Kosovo battle, which was a historical development, the mythology was around some of the aspects which may have been romanticized over the centuries of bringing it forward to the next generation. But I find it fascinating that it actually did survive the full 500 or 470 something years of Ottoman occupation, thereby contributing to the preservation of national identity of a Serbian nation in a very, very significant way. I personally believe that there are three pillars of Serbian national identity. One is our language and our alphabet. I mean, we have a unique alphabet, and we have a language that every Serbian speaks or tries to speak, regardless of where he or she lives, anywhere in the world. I think this is one element of national identity. The other element of national identity is Serbian Orthodox Christianity, which I mentioned at the beginning. Not all nations are like that. For instance, the Albanians are not like that. There are Christian Albanians, Catholics, and there are Orthodox Albanians, and there are Muslim Albanians. And the case of Serbia, very similar to the case of Greece, the national identity is closely related to religion. Whether that's optimal or not optimal, we could probably discuss for hours. And then the third element of the national identity is this Kosovo myth. So you take away one, you break one, and you can discuss what does a break mean, whether the recognition of Kosovo would constitute the break of this pillar of identity. I believe it would. But shaking identity in this very tumultuous times, with the speeding of all processes in the world, would put a small nation like ours, in my opinion, in a very precarious position. Very precarious position. And one should not forget the fact that there are many more nations who no longer exist historically than the nations that currently exist in the world. So I don't think it is a safe assumption to take it for granted that playing around with issues of national identity is something you can easily take care of. You asked another important question, which is the profiting of elites from this. This is certainly a space where, in the past, we have had a lot of irresponsible politics in Serbia, but also in the Albanian side. But I'll limit myself to Serbia. That's obviously a place where, well, the emotions are high, you go for it, and then you try to use it to extract political or some kind of other benefit. My personal example is different. I lost in the last stage of voting for Secretary General because of my position on Kosovo, which is a counterexample of elites losing and not winning because of that. But mine is a very, very particular example. I agree with you, and there is a very fine line between holding a responsible political line related to national identity and populism. There is a very, very thin line between the two, and it is often crossed into this populist territory, which unfortunately had costed Serbia and continues to cost Serbia to the detriment of the ordinary people. So thank you for that question. And the last thing that you raised in a very aloof fashion, but I think it's actually one of the very, very delicate things in the Balkans, is the issue of Republika Srpska. And you casually said, oh, well, if they decide to join Serbia, well, I think it's a big, big issue. It's an issue that can cause dramatic instability and probably lead to another round of conflict in the Balkans. But again, Kosovo stands there as a very, very precarious example and precedent in the context of Republika Srpska too. And I'll tell you why. I don't know how many of you are aware of the fact that in 2010, the International Court of Justice, when asked at the request of Serbia through the General Assembly to give the advisory opinion on the legality of Kosovo's independence, the way it was proclaimed, gave a very, very delicately phrased answer, which some of the advocates of Kosovo independence, they tried to present it as a proof that Kosovo did everything right in line with international law, but that's not actually true. Because the court, International Court of Justice in 2010, said the following: the Declaration of Independence does not violate international law. You know why? Because international law doesn't recognize declarations of independence at all. In other words, to make it clearer, if I were to write a Declaration of Independence and ask all of you to sign it, and this Declaration of Independence would declare Festsal to be a republic, independent and sovereign state, we would not violate international law. But at the same time, we would not create an independent state. But nowadays, after this court ruling, we know that declaring independence is not illegal under international law. Whether it leads or not lead to creation of a state depends on the factual situation on the ground, on the politics and power. And in the case of Crimea, at least so far it seemed to have worked. In the case of Catalonia, which also declared independence, it didn't. But what we know is that if Republika Srpska were to declare independence, they would not violate international law. Now, whether or not that would lead to the change of border in the Balkans is another matter. I think it would lead to a war, and therefore should be avoided. But this precedent of Kosovo continues to hang in the air above us in the Balkans in a very precarious way. So playing responsible politics versus playing populist politics is sometimes a very delicate act.
Just for the sake of reality, more than 100 countries recognized already Kosovo as an independent state. You know that. And you have been fighting against that during your time as foreign minister.
To be quite precise, Ambassador, at some point it was above 100, but since there was a wave of derecognitions of actually countries that withdrew the recognition of Kosovo in the last couple of years, now this number is below 100. And by the way, most of the countries that withdrew the recognition of Kosovo, they actually put in their formal explanation as to why they were withdrawing this recognition, the opinion of the International Court of Justice, the advisory opinion.
May I, because your answer triggered some thinking in me. You said the identity of Serbia relies on the language.
Language and alphabet.
And alphabet, on the religion,
Yeah.
and on Kosovo.
These are the three main pillars.
If I come to think of it, that means that you say Republika Srpska is Serbian, Kosovo is Serbian, and wherever the Serbian Orthodox Church is, it's Serbia.
It's a very delicate question. I'm not going to answer it without difficulty, because it requires better understanding, I'd say. And actually, this is one of the reasons why we are so negative with regard to potential Kosovo joining the UN. In the Orthodox world, unlike in the Catholic world, where you have a pope and you have a single structure, in the Orthodox world, there is a rule that you can have only one Orthodox canonically recognized autocephalous church per state, right? So there have been temporary historical deviation from this, but in general, since the split of the church into the Eastern and the Western, this was the rule. One church per one state. So if Kosovo were to join the United Nations, and after Kosovo joining the United Nations, there's absolutely nothing that can stand in the way of the two UN member states declaring that they want to join and become one state, that is Greater Albania. Or you don't have to call it the Greater Albania. You can just call it, Albania or Dardania, or whichever way you want to call it. If there's one Albanian state that includes Kosovo territory, there can be only one Orthodox Church in this country. And Albanian Orthodox Church exists. It is fully recognized. It is canonical. It is autocephalous. So this is one of the reasons, these delicate issues of church and state and relation to Serbian identity, is that makes it a not so straightforward thing to negotiate when it comes to the future status of Kosovo or when it comes to constitutional position of Bosnia and Herzegovina. But strategically, two biggest peoples of the Western Balkans are Serbian and Albanian. And both of those peoples, they live in a number of countries that are constituting the Western Balkans. These issues of whether or not these ethnic groups that exist in different countries constitute a basis for a change of border is a very delicate issue, and I would not rather go there. This is why I would personally advocate for the preservation of the current borders in the Balkans and not change them and not make any exceptions to this rule. Because if you do start playing around with borders, then there are going to be competing claims leading to a disaster in most parts of the Western Balkans.
That would open a lot of questions about whether the Montenegrins are a people and the North Macedonians are a people, and the question on whether a state should be based on one language only. That would need change of borders. But we don't open this box. No, I close this box.
I hope we don't. Not even here in the Diplomatic Academy, let alone in reality in the Balkans.
Over there.
No. Please.
Good afternoon, Mr. Jeremić. I'm also an alumna of the Diplomatic Academy. My name is Teresa Reiter. I don't agree with a lot of things that you say, but I mean, we won't resolve that tonight. But I have a question. If you say that the deal as it is proposed now by France and Germany or Europe or whatever is lunacy and suicide, the Kosovo Albanians don't want to be part of Serbia. What is your solution or your dream of how this is going to be resolved one day?
Good question. Legitimate question. I personally don't think that this generation who has lived through this war would be capable of resolving this issue decisively for all the future generations. What I think could be probably done best in this time, in this generation, is to find ways of how to peacefully live together next to each other without crossing each other's red lines, finding ways to make sure that economy functions, that healthcare functions, that education cooperation exists, that people-to-people relationship becomes unburdened by these political differences. But you remind me what you asked me, how do you say, they no longer want to be, the Albanian people, they don't want no longer be a part of Serbia, you said, okay? Again, I'm turning your attention to precedents which are very, very complicated in international relations. I will share with you, this is not the first time that I'm publicly speaking about it. When I was a young foreign minister in year 2007, I was tasked to go to Washington and to try to convince the Bush administration that they shouldn't be going for this unilateral declaration of independence of Kosovo. And it was a tall order, to be honest. But I did have an unusually long conversation with the then Secretary of State, Condoleezza Rice. She wasn't very doctrinary, like many Americans were and are with regard to Kosovo issue. She was open to listen. Her issue was something else. Her issue was the war in Iraq at that time, and she didn't pay too much attention to the Balkans. And I was trying to give legal arguments, I was trying to give political arguments, I was trying to give geostrategic arguments, moral arguments against Kosovo's independence. Amongst them was, look, we are a firmly pro-European government, the most pro-European government that you have ever had and that you will probably ever have in Serbia. Why are you trying to impose on us something that you didn't impose on the defeated dictator in 1999, when you were dictating the terms of peace? You won the war in 1999. You were basically writing down the Security Council Resolution 1244 that was ending it. Why did you not take it away then, when Serbia was isolated and defeated? No, you come 8 years later and asking a democratic government to be punished for the deeds of the dictator that we managed to overthrow by risking our lives? Well, Madam Secretary, this is going to have long-term effects with regard to the public opinion in our country when it comes to Western powers and America in particular. She didn't want to listen to that. She was kind of okay to receive the argument, but she was politely saying no to everything that I had said. At some point she said, because the meeting was coming to an end, she said, Mr. Minister, this is a special case. And I said, well, I have to interrupt you, Madam Secretary. Before you go further, please tell me who has the right to declare special cases? Obviously you, but can anybody else do the same? Can, for instance, Russians declare special cases from international law? Can permanent members of the Security Council do that? Or who can declare special cases? She smiled, didn't answer. But then she said, what was so special? She said, there was an exceptionally brutal dictatorship that was oppressing an ethnic minority to the point of extreme. It brought about international intervention, and now 99% of those people, they no longer want to be a part of your country, Mr. Minister. There's nothing you can do about it. So my answer to her was, Madam Secretary, you're now confusing me. When did you switch talking about Iraq? She was like, what? Well, there was a dictator who was oppressing, actually gassing an ethnic minority. There was an international intervention. Iraq is now, you say, a democracy. And 99% of Kurds, they want to break away from Iraq. Does this mean that they have the right to do that? Or perhaps that Saddam was actually not such a bad guy. So Serbia deserves to be punished for Milosevic's deeds, and Iraq doesn't. It's a very, very dangerous territory when you go there and you say, well, these people no longer want to be a part of this. It's a legitimate desire, but it is not the only consideration that you can take into calculation if you really want to preserve peace and stability long term. What I'm advocating for is no war, no conflict, but mutual understanding that involves the mutual understanding of each other's red lines that are very, very firmly drawn.
The next second row, yes, you, please.
Thank you very much. I'm also a student at the Diplomatic Academy Vienna, and I have two questions about the EU enlargement. So the first question is, and particularly in relation to Serbia, do you really believe that it's a veto right which hinders this process, or it's this the very fact that the EU sees Serbia as an ally to Russia than ally of the European Union itself? And the second question is, if I understood you correctly, you mentioned if we become the members of the European Union, it would be fine. But if we don't, this will be also fine. And could you elaborate more on that? Yes, please.
Well, the first thing, I mean, this is certainly part, I mean, of course I simplified, it's not the only reason, but it's one of the very important reasons why Serbia or Bosnia or Northern Macedonia are not going to be given a seat, equal seat in the European Council. There are other issues, like Serbia is not a very well-functioning state. It's certainly not a state where the rule of law functions. Normally, there were big regressions in deterioration on this front over the past 10 years. So even if there was a political will inside the European Union, we wouldn't qualify under the current circumstances, and we would have a lot of work to do in order to get close to being able to qualify for the membership. And the issue of whether Serbia is viewed as a Russian ally, I don't know. I mean, Northern Macedonia is certainly not seen as a Russian ally, and Albania is not seen as a Russian ally, but they are equally not going to be given membership. I mean, in the case of Northern Macedonia, now that we're calling this country Northern Macedonia, before it was called Macedonia, they changed the name. They did absolutely everything that was asked that they do in order to expedite this European process. They joined the sanctions against Russia, unlike us. They're the best student in the class. Join NATO, everything. And why is it that they are constantly being kept with the head underwater, figuratively speaking, when it comes to European accession? Because there is a strategic repulsion when it comes to enlargement, not just in the Balkans, but in principle. And this is why I am deeply concerned about the European decision to grant the candidate status to Ukraine. Nowadays, you can hear Ukraine high-level officials, and quite rightfully so, asking for the acceleration of this process, talking about the 2024, 2026. I mean, my God, it's so not going to happen. And it's going to be so disappointing for them, like it has been continuously disappointing for successive generations in the Balkans, which led us to this situation. And your second question was, if you can remind me? It would be also fine if we manage to reform our countries so that we become a functioning modern European state. If we manage to reform our states so that we function like Slovenia or we function like the Czech Republic, then it won't be a tragedy if we don't have a seat, which I hope we get. But for as long as we are functioning as a modern European state, it's not a matter of life or death. What it is a matter of life or death is, are we like a functioning democratic state or a corrupt dictatorship? That is a matter of life and death, in my opinion. Thank you. Jeff,
there was a question.
Jeff wants to ask a question.
Sorry, yes.
Thank you. I wanted to come back to 2008 for a moment, because I think it's a very interesting observation that you made that 2008 was a watershed. I don't think it actually started with Kosovo independence, though. The watershed started at the Bucharest NATO summit, because that was the ultimate crossing of the red line by the United States in one of the stupidest and most consequential decisions of modern times, which was to announce that Ukraine and Georgia would become members of NATO, which is the trigger that set off countless disasters, starting with, by the way, Russia announcing about 6 weeks later that it would veto Kosovo's membership. This followed. And then a couple weeks after that was the war in Georgia, which absolutely unequivocally was the result of the Bucharest decision by Bush. And I can tell you on that date how many European leaders said to me, "Is your president crazy?" But they never say it publicly. This is Europe's biggest problem. It's all hypocrisy. That they know that this was a disaster, but they won't say it publicly because they leave it to an American to say how stupid American policy is. They won't say it, so I'll say it. Unbelievable, which is the start of everything that has happened. We did not act prudently to respect red lines. And when you act imprudently, you end up with wars all over the place. So I think your observation about 2008 is really a very pertinent and correct one. Just to mention your observation about 2015 and how it rattled Europe, this migration wave. In 2011, Obama asked the CIA to work with Saudi Arabia to overthrow Assad. That was also another imprudent action. It led to a mass migration wave that caused great instability in Europe. So much of what is happening today is the lack of respect for red lines. We should listen to each other and understand that there are limits of action. And I have no sympathy for Europe going and demanding, you must you must do this, you must do that, when there's also nothing on the other side, because there's no way that any of these countries, like you say, is going to be joining Europe anytime soon. The one point I would make on this alternative, though, just to mention, what Europe is doing is leaving the Western Balkans in an economic disaster, because it's not only no membership, but no economic strategy as well. And this is the huge mistake. I wouldn't even want membership, given the circumstances, but the economics is crucial. What kind of infrastructure? What kind of decarbonization? What kind of energy system? What kind of transport? What kind of fiber? This is part of Europe. And Europe needs to answer that question in a very pragmatic way. Then you'll create jobs, you'll have an economy that functions, but currently it's impossible because it's not even on the table. That kind of structural investment program, which is what the Western Balkans really needs. So to my mind, I'd go straight for the economics and try to get very practical, and it would improve governance tremendously, because then there'd be a chance of attracting honest foreign investment that is European-oriented. And then you'd have governance improve also, because there'd be a huge return to good governance in the sense of attracting foreign investment.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Jeff was my mentor at Harvard, and this explains probably a lot of things that I had said. But thank you very much for this. No. Yeah. Are there any?
There was a question.
Sure, please.
My name is Maxim, coming from Bratislava, working for SEP Consult. Ambassador Brix asked to make a question about snap election, so I'm going to ask one. But maybe you know that in Slovakia in September it will be another snap elections, because populist government fall, and it adds up to energy and economical crisis. And some political analyst in Slovakia says that it is some Balkan features in Slovak politics for now. I don't know what exactly they mean, but it doesn't sound very well. And maybe it's some Russian influence coming up in Slovakia. I don't know for sure. And I would like to ask you, can you analyze any common features in these political situations with snap elections in Serbia, in Slovakia? Maybe it will be some common outputs as well.
Oh, well, thank you very much for this question. I must admit that I'm not that much of an expert in current affairs of Slovakia right now. It's a country that I visited very many times. I have many dear friends there. Working with Slovak diplomats has always been a great pleasure for me personally. This is one of few foreign affairs ministries in Europe that for some reason have dozens of people who speak perfect Serbian language. I found it fascinating. Every single ambassador of Slovakia that was sent to Belgrade, Mr. Ambassador, spoke perfect. Absolutely. Everyone spoke like perfect Serbian. I mean, Mr. Lajčák, who is right now the special envoy of the European Union, he was ambassador in Belgrade at some point. He speaks Serbian without accent, as a matter of fact. But I must admit that lately I have not been following the politics in Slovakia. One thing that I did observe is that despite swings in political forces, there were changes in government over the past 10 years in Slovakia. Slovakia kept its position with regard to recognizing the unilateral declaration of independence of Kosovo, which was no to recognition. And this is something that all of us in Serbia deeply respect. I personally don't believe that there is going to be a snap election in Serbia. But in Serbia, all decisions, including whether or not there's going to be an election and everything else, is unfortunately made by only one person. And I'm not terribly close to that person. I have not had a chance to talk to him, and not that I'm missing that, but I don't know what is in his head. The experience suggests that what usually happens is opposite to what he says. So I would bet on not having elections this year, but then again, it is up to him to decide. And once the elections are held, there is a very significant difference between the elections in Serbia and the elections in Slovakia. Because you do have free and fair elections. And in Slovakia, if you're working for, I don't know, a public enterprise, you're not forced to vote and to prove to your boss that you had voted for the government, which is the case in Serbia. In Slovakia, you do have measured and balanced presence of different political factions in media. It's an illusion, it's a dream in Serbia. We did have it once, last time in 2012, which is when we lost the elections because these other guys won more votes. What we did was just left office and they entered the office. And Mr. Erdogan is one of the people that our president has a great admiration for publicly. He had said it so many times. And Erdogan said once that democracy is like a streetcar. You hop on, it gets you where you want, and then you hop off. And this is exactly what happened in Serbia. They used democracy to get in power, and then they dismantled it. So our elections is somewhat a more complicated exercise than the one in Slovakia. But one day, I'm very, very hopeful that we're going to converge. You had your difficult times as a country, and you managed to get out of those difficult times. So you may serve as an inspiration to us in the future. And, you know, getting upswings and upticks of populism, it happens everywhere in Europe these days. So I don't think that Slovakia is alone in this regard. But you can have some comfort in my words saying that it's much better than in Serbia. In Serbia, we're a linear combination of, when it comes to governance, a linear combination of Hungary, Turkey, and Russia, which actually goes hand in hand with the explanation, the historical background that I had given. So Hungary, Turkey, and Russia have for a long time been presence and potent forces in the Balkans. Unfortunately, none of the three right now are, in my opinion at least, very much of a shining examples of good governance.
There is time for a last question, or for two actually. One, two. Yes.
Hello, my name is Flamur Ladrovce. I'm a political science student in Vienna. I was born and raised in Kosovo, and my question would be, now, first of all, I wanted to correct you. You earlier mentioned that a number below 100 countries accepted or recognized Kosovo's independence, which is not correct, but 115 countries accepted Kosovo's independence. Then you mentioned earlier that the minority of Serbs in Kosovo are living under disgusting circumstances, which is also not correct. And you didn't mention that the minority in Serbia, the Kosovo minority in Serbia, lives under very bad circumstances. For example, we have in Preševa and Bujanovac, the minority of Kosovos, where we had like statues of war heroes, in our opinion, which were just put away or destructed. And my question would be, you mentioned earlier that Serbia has a national identity, which Kosovo has no connection with Serbia because we don't have the language that you have. We speak another language, completely another language. We have another alphabet. We have the European alphabet. We have like a lot of differences. So why should a country, in my opinion, an independent country, go back to a state which it doesn't profit anything?
Thank you. Thank you for this question. You mentioned three things, and I'm not sure that your math is correct, that your number of 115 countries is correct. I think it is far below that. This has become my life for the past many years. I'm following this very closely. But I advise you to look up again, because there were several instances in which the papers for the withdrawal of the Declaration of Independence are being disputed by the authorities in Pristina and so on and so forth. But it is well below 100. If it were 115, I'm sure that Kosovo would have tried to go to the General Assembly and to win a vote for the membership, observer membership status, in the same way that Palestine had achieved it back in 2012. But Kosovo would lose if they tried to do that. And this is one of the reasons why they don't try it. But that's less, I would say, important. It's definitely a divisive issue. A half of the world is surely not recognizing Kosovo, and a more populous part of the world. And put together, believe it or not, a richer part of the world is not recognizing Kosovo's independence. It's definitely a divisive issue that needs to be resolved if we were to have a common prosperous future. How to have a common prosperous future? Yeah, we have to come to an agreement. Whether we're ready to do that now under the current circumstances, under the circumstances that I had described, that pertains to the Serbian people in Kosovo, and to what you are describing with regard to the Albanian ethnic minority in southern Serbia, which I'm not going to get into disputing your description, but I don't agree with it, but I respect it, right? I don't think that we are capable of reaching long-lasting solution under the circumstances. And this is why I'm advocating that we find ways of working together with respecting each other's red lines. One of our red lines is that we don't think that your membership in the United Nations would constitute an improving of a long-term stability in the Balkans, and I had explained why. And there are many ethnic minorities who live in Serbia, which was the third thing that you asked about, and Hungarian minority is the most populous one. They are part of the government. They've been actually part of every government in Serbia since the introduction of multi-party democracy, and their rights, their language is upheld, supported, respected. They have no complaints in this regard. I understand that we went through a difficult history, but the current reality is very different. And I think that within this reality, we need to find ways of understanding each other, respecting each other, and moving forward together with each other, whilst leaving the resolution of the insolvable aspects of our disagreement to the future generations.
There were two last questions, actually. One and two, yes.
Thank you very much. So I am Saito, University of Vienna, and my question is some global question. So you mentioned that every world order be created or recreated after the Great War. So now I agree with you. Now we are living in the so-called multi-layered post-war order since 30-year war in 17th century. And my question is, how would the world order after the after the current Russian war against Ukraine look like?
The best always comes last, the biggest questions. I think it requires a lengthy debate. But what goes without saying, in my opinion, is that we live in a time of a geopolitical recession. And when one says recession, one usually refers to economy. In economy, you have cycles. Economy is cyclical. You have periods of boom and periods of bust, and they're easier to spot because they can be easily quantified, and they tend to last for a few years, and they come one after another. In geopolitics, I think the processes are also cyclical. And there are periods of booms when international cooperation flourishes, and then there are periods of busts when there is less and less international cooperation. And once you fall into this trough, you are in a geopolitical recession. The bad news about geopolitical recession is that they tend to last much longer. The cycles in geopolitics tend to last much longer than the cycles in economy. So I think that the current, one would call lawlessness, others would call it disarray, a third yet would call it disorder, is going to stay with us for a while. And we need to find ways of working together despite the paralysis of most of international institutions, and try to address issues where we can easily come together than spending all our time and energy on issues where we can't. For instance, climate change, and the context of negotiation being COP as a place where countries talk to each other and negotiate to each other, where the key players are not as antagonized as they are, for instance, in the Security Council of the United Nations. I think that our energy and focus should be on such topics in such areas, building trust, building positive vibe and energy, in hoping that it would spill over in other fields where, admittedly, cooperation is much more difficult to imagine under the present circumstances. And the building of a new order, I don't see it coming that fast. And if there is any acceleration into the developments, I wouldn't bet all my possessions on that being a positive development. I fear that what we're currently going to is towards a Cold War, which can still be avoided, but we are sleepwalking into a Cold War, that is going to last for a very long time. And this war in Ukraine is actually reminiscent of the beginning of the first Cold War. I heard some smart people making and drawing historical parallels. The war in Korea was the first hot war of the Cold War, in which the two main Cold War protagonists took opposing sides. And it lasted for a very long time. Technically, it actually never ended. And it was on a different continent. The Cold War was starting in Europe, but the first hot war of the Cold War, one, was in a different continent in Asia. Now it's different. The Cold War II is obviously between the United States and China, but the first hot war of the Cold War II, in which the two main protagonists, US and China, are taking opposite sides, is right now taking place in Ukraine. So this is where we're heading, I fear. I think it will be exceptionally important for the sake of prosperity of future generations that we avoid this scenario. What we can do to avoid this scenario? Nothing much, except from what I said. Let us work together on issues where there are far less disagreements, like climate change, than on issues related to national security.
There is one more question, please.
Alex Samadic, I study at the University of Economics here in Vienna. We mentioned briefly that many of the great powers have over time played different roles and in different capacities with Serbia, and we kind of over time had to juggle playing each of those sides. How do you see that unfolding in the future? Do you see us picking any of the sides more so, or do you think we can keep up the juggling act with different powers for the years to come?
Well, this has been the history of the Balkans, this continuous friction. History, in my opinion, when one speaks about human history is actually the history of relationships between the big powers and the histories of small nations. There are stories, and sometimes glorious, sometimes tragic, more often tragic. But these are the stories of rises and falls in the context of the conflicts of the great powers. Unfortunately for the Balkans, this is one geography that has had millennia of conflicts and frictions between the great powers, and I do not see this ending very quickly. Serbia decisively picking a side, yeah, it might happen. But I'm not sure for how long before circumstances changing and the situation necessitating a different outlook. So, when somebody comes and says to me, well, you gotta once pick a side, it sounds to me like you got to end the history. History doesn't end, at least not in our part of the world. It has never ended. And this juggling is a means of survival, not just for Serbia, for everybody else in the Balkans. We need to be respectful of geography. We need to be respectful of history. We need to be respectful of each other, I think. And the big powers are going to stay. Turkey is going to stay. Russia is going to stay. West is not going to go away. It's here at Renweg, where the Balkans starts. So no chance that West is going to leave the place. And we would have to find ways of working with all. I personally would love if we had made different choices. When I say we, not just Serbia, but we as Balkan nations in the international communities 10 years ago, 20 years ago, and 30 years ago in particular at the beginning of the 1990s, because we would have had a completely different conversation had different choices be made back in the 1991 and 1992. But we didn't. And it is what it is. We are what we are. We need to look to the future, hopefully to a prosperous future, hopefully to a common future, hopefully to a future in which there are no more wars between different ethnicities, not physical at the very least. But we would need more responsible governance and more responsible relationship to the others. And that applies to each and every capital right now in the Balkans.
Well, dear Vuk, thank you for frank and open discussion, answering all the questions that were put there. And let me say, this is part of the spirit of such a place, that we have open discussions.
Thank you.
And as you know, we agree to disagree
Absolutely.
on the Kosovo issue between Austria and your position. We are campaigning that all the EU members sooner or later recognize Kosovo. And that's
Good luck with
totally
Spain.
against what you think about. But you see, that is what diplomacy is about.
Sure, absolutely.
That we find agreement here. And I hope we can invite you back again here
Be great
and give a
honor.
big round of applause to our speaker tonight.
Thank you so much.